This is another reason why experimental film and art is interesting to me, because that's where it's made. Like, all the answers aren't given to you. Like, when you're watching a conventional narrative film, for instance, all the answers are there. Like, there's a very specific intention almost for every single choice that's made. But here I'm just like kind of giving you halfway, and you have to fill in the rest. So maybe that's what it's about. Maybe the silence is about having the viewer fill in the rest.
Yeah.
But there's other projects where silence is used as a counter to the noise. Like, literally, it's like, you have some music and then you don't. You have music, then you don't. Like you want, because you're creating tension.
This is Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast from Loose Leaf Transmissions. Hey y'all, and welcome to another edition of the podcast. If you are new here, it's great to have you along. And just to give you a sense of what you're about to jump into, my name is Tyler, and I'm a composer, a radio broadcaster, curator, and producer, but more than anything, I just love making things. And on this show, I sit down with other creative people to talk about their process, their journey, their philosophies, basically whatever it is that makes them who they are. And if you have been here before, welcome back. I really do appreciate you being here again. On this episode of Music Maker, I'm joined by Jacqueline Wood. I first met Jacqueline last fall at a special event here in Cincinnati, where we both live, and it was one of those instant connections where I knew I had to have her on the podcast. And honestly, our conversation lived up to and maybe even exceeded that instinct altogether. Jacqueline is a Cincinnati-based moving image artist whose work draws deeply from the nature of light, duration, and presence. Her practice spans film, video, installation, sculpture, and projection, often blurring the boundaries between media and redefining how we experience cinematic space. And beyond her own creative work, Jacqueline founded the Mini Microcinema, ran a small production company, and has exhibited her work across the country with her latest film, This Is a Movie, recently receiving a special jury mention at the 2025 Athens International Film and Video Festival. In this conversation, Jacqueline reflects on the emotional honesty at the heart of her creative process, including how her most recent film became a meditation on unfinished projects, infertility, and creative loss. We also talk about the relationship between analog and digital media in her work, processing personal experience through film, and how stepping outside of traditional systems has allowed her to fully embrace artistic freedom. By the way, just a quick note about this episode. Jacqueline invited me to join her in the bookstore that she owns and runs for this conversation, which was absolutely wonderful being among all those books and getting to chat with Jacqueline there. But you will also hear that the space is a bit more reverberant than how many of my interviews typically sound. And it's also along a busy street in Cincinnati, and so you'll hear those street sounds in the background, cars driving by, ambulances in the distance at some points. You'll hear all of that, but I think the interview is fantastic. Just giving you a heads up, it'll sound a little bit different than what you're used to. Well, let's get into it. The conversation starts in just a moment. So I'm not going to lie, I've definitely gotten to an end of a podcast episode, realized that I loved it, and I still forgot to follow the podcast or even rate the show. So here's just a gentle nudge for you. If you like what you hear, please consider tapping that follow button now while it's fresh. Now, onto my conversation with Jacqueline Wood. Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much. Well, first of all, for hosting me in your space and allowing me to get to know you a little better. I haven't yet had a filmmaker on the podcast, and so just kind of researching you and learning about your work and getting to view some of your work, I think there's a lot we can talk about. And just thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So where we always start on Music Maker is as far back as you remember or care to talk about, and that is, what is your earliest artistic memory as a filmmaker?
As a filmmaker. Well, it's interesting because growing up, I wasn't particularly into art making. So I think I was always a very creative child and a creative sort of teenager, and took art classes and things like that. But my main focus actually was more in sports. So I was a soccer player, and my family history, I grew up actually around pro football, which is a whole other sort of interesting conversation. And so it was more about the physicality sort of. That's how you sort of express yourself, right? But I also grew up around a lot of culture in terms of music and art and film, and just because of my parents' influence. So I ended up going to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and I kind of went in not even knowing what I wanted to study. There were moments when I thought I wanted to be a social worker. There were moments I thought I wanted to be an architect, but I went in sort of with a really open mind. But one thing that I really was interested in was either I was going to work at the radio station, or I was going to work at the film festival.
Okay.
In Ann Arbor, and as a freshman, right?
Sure.
In college, and I just so happened to be driving by the Ann Arbor Film Festival office, and I pulled over and I kind of went in and I said, "Oh, I want to intern," and that's when it all started. So I hadn't ever really seen experimental film before. I wanted to learn more. But the minute I started working at that film festival, it changed my entire life. And that's sort of the basis of, okay, well, not only do I want to watch this type of work and engage with it, I want to make it. And so I really didn't start thinking about filmmaking as a kind of career path or as a trajectory until my freshman year of college.
It's so funny that you that is your story, because that's almost identical to my story as like getting into radio. I mean, the fact that you even said that it was like between radio and this film festival, because that's exactly what I did. I like showed up to college on the first day. I went to the public radio station on campus and I asked, "What do I have to do to work here?" And like I wasn't like my parents didn't listen to NPR. It wasn't like anything like that. It was just like, I feel like inclined to ask about this. And here I am still doing it.
Yeah.
So like, did you get to meet filmmakers, like professionals, through this internship? I mean, what was your first encounter with like a real life filmmaker?
What was cool was that right when I sort of started working for the film festival, the director at the time and the staff, we just really got along really well. So I sort of went above and beyond, and it was really involved from the beginning. What was really cool about those sort of early years was that I ended up becoming their sort of housing and hospitality coordinator. So it was really neat that I could engage with these filmmakers and these people coming into town for the festival and get to sort of know them. And then once festival week hit, I sort of could kind of already had these little relationships with these people and could see their work and then engage with them. And that was a very, formative experience. So I really think my first sort of engagement with the filmmakers that I wanted to learn more about was just kind of being around the festival, seeing these films. What's interesting about experimental film is you don't need a lot of resources. So, I mean, it can be a person who's working on a film in their basement for 10 years with zero money, and they come out with this sort of masterpiece that maybe not a lot of people even get to see, but it really is this sort of interesting expression from themselves that doesn't always have a place in the greater film world or the art world.
Sure.
And so to me, it was like kind of like meeting these filmmakers and being like, oh, you can make something really small, but it can have a really big impact on yourself, and then it can also have a big impact on other people. So yeah, I think, long story short, engaging with these filmmakers at the film festival specifically was kind of the first time I said, oh, people do this. People make a living. Not necessarily making the films. A lot of them are professors and teach in the university, or they have production jobs and things like that. Right. But people do this in the world.
When did you make your first film? I mean, was this, you said that you weren't really familiar with it until you got to college, and even then, through this work you were doing with this festival, it was like kind of hospitality, kind of hosting the folks who were coming. I mean, so what was your first foray? What did that look like?
Yeah, so when I was working for the festival and sort of getting to know the lay of the land with different professors and things that were available at the university. But my first production class, really where I was able to make the type of film that I wanted to make, was in a video art class with a professor named Terry Saris, who's a mentor still and a friend. And she was extremely influential on my own art practice and art making. And so I think the first film that I really sort of, you know, in college you're making group projects, you're kind of exploring different genres with these like intro production classes. But really, once I could do that video art class, I ended up making an in-camera edit little film called Imperfect, and it was the first time that I had control. I didn't have to kind of deal with the parameters of an assignment. I also, even though I love narrative film and love literature and things that tell a story and have characters and all of that, I don't want to make it.
Yeah.
I love to consume it. I love to teach it, you know, when I was teaching, but I don't want to, if I wanted to make narrative film, I would be in Hollywood right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? You know, and it's a very different trajectory. But the type of film that I sort of was drawn to were these sort of like smaller, sort of personal projects that really expressed a feeling that, or trying to answer something inside of me that I had a question and I needed to answer it. And so really it was that, you know, I think that was freshman year as well, second semester, maybe sophomore year, when I truly was able to kind of like get my hands on the equipment. There was, you know, an assignment, but I was able to kind of have freedom in that class for the first time.
Yeah, I think when we're first starting out, it's like this whole idea of creating a feeling around a work. That's like, I don't remember ever talking about that in a class, but that's like such a huge part of what I feel like I do in my music. Is it's how do you just create a feeling? So I don't know. I mean, is that like something that you kind of realized and then ran with? I mean, is that still a part of what you do today?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really just kind of like an internal kind of, so like I said before, you have this question, you have this feeling, you have this something that you want to express, something that you need to work out. And film and video specifically, I think I'm drawn to it because it uses so many different media. So it's not just composition, it's not just light and camera, but there is music, there's sound, there's duration. So it's not something still, but there's something that you can play with time. And so, you know, for some reason I was just sort of drawn to all the different options. And specifically when I talk about my work, but I also try to teach experimental filmmaking and filmmaking, it's really what I try to get across to students is it's just a series of choices. That's all art making is. Yeah. Do you shoot it in color or black and white? Do you shoot it in a 4:3 or 16:9? Do you use this camera or that camera, this lens or that lens, silent or not silent? You know, it's just a series of these choices, right? Right. And it can go in so many different ways. And there's always, Terry, my mentor, would always say, there's always the film you meant to make, and then the film you actually make. Right. And that's with all art making.
Exactly. Oh my God. Yeah. So two things come to mind. When I was in grad school, a friend and peer of mine, and he still is, like, became interested in like chants and aleatoric and graphic notation music. So rather than like sheet music on a page, you're responding to like graphical images, and it's you get something different every time. It's like improvisation. Our teacher was trying to get him to make some decisions about his work, and he wasn't doing it. And I just remember my teacher saying something along the lines of, like, that's all it is making a decision. Like, that's all music composition is. Yeah. And you're right, all art making is just like making a decision, or perhaps not making a decision in a lot of ways. So the other thing that came to mind on your last point is another lesson that I had with my teacher in grad school. He was talking about how what we have in our head, our concepts, and like even like the music we imagine in this case, it will never like make it out onto the page. Like, by the time you put it on a page and then someone else usually has to play it and perform it, it's just like not it's not the same as like that original intent. And so what you have to do is like make it so extreme on the page to get it across to somebody. And that's like still something, he said that to me maybe 10 years ago, and it's still something that I'm trying to, like a code I'm trying to crack, like but maybe that's also the point. Like you never really get like what's in your head out into the world in its most pure form. Maybe that's what what's supposed to be like.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think that's why I was so drawn to video art specifically for just a practical reason in undergrad was you can make solo projects, right? With the filmmaking classes, you had to do group projects. And I don't mind collaboration. It's just not the thing that I'm most drawn to. I've done successful collaborations. I've worked with people, and that's a very different type of thing where there's a synergy that's created and you're sort of bouncing off things. But for me, it was always, yes, how can I get that thing in my head and get it out in its purest form using a specific medium, right? And sometimes a project, it sort of tells you what it wants to be, So is this going to be a film that people sit down and watch in a traditional movie theater? Is this going to be an installation in space where you're sort of thinking about the relationship between the image or the projection or the object and how people are interacting with it? So sometimes art can it's this kind of conversation you're having, and it's always going to change. Like you're saying, there's never going to be a direct one-to-one until there's, chips in our brain and,
right.
Like who knows what the future holds. But with what's possible now, there's going to be some level of compromise, right?
Yeah.
And limitation. And then it's a matter of like, how close can you get? And so oftentimes with some of my work, there's a feeling, it's hard to know when something's done, when something's ever done.
Sure. Yeah.
But sometimes there's sort of a gut feeling inside where you're like, okay, this is it. I got it. Now, whether it was what I intended or not, it can kind of feel finished.
Yeah.
And that's when I edit, because I was doing professional production, commercials and different types of videos for small businesses and nonprofits and things. I did that for like 15 years. Same thing. Editing is just, to me, you can't necessarily teach it because it's a gut feeling about time. Do I need to cut a frame here, a frame there? Does this need to be longer? You have to sit in your body and sit with it as a viewer. And you kind of know once it feels good, when it looks good, when it's done. So.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I really relate to it too.
Yeah.
So kind of like building out a timeline, I guess, if you will. Yep. So you're in your first video art class. You're loving what you're doing. I mean, at what point was that the moment that you knew you wanted to pursue filmmaking as a craft and career, or did that come at a different point later on?
No, it was almost immediate. I think when I first, it was mostly not even the making part. It was the encountering that this type of art exists, and like I just didn't know up until that point that you could have an interesting medium that doesn't fit into such a box, right? So yeah, it was just the exposure to the films and the filmmakers at the film festival, and then once I started making them, it was really cool because it was like part of me is just like a huge nerd, right? So I love the technology part. It's like, how do things work? I love the tech side, right? So it's like, okay, get all the equipment and get these things. You're just like preparing yourself with these tools. You're teaching yourself the skills. Once you kind of know how something works, then you can experiment. So that's what a lot of the next few years were, just kind of like going through these classes, getting these ideas. But really, the trajectory that I had in undergrad was I wanted to get out of the movie theater and out of inside. Like, I wanted to get out into the world. Yeah. So taking projectors outside and taking projectors into space and being able to project moving images in different forms, that really excited me. And got my brain going, because to me it wasn't that interesting at that time to just be having the viewer sitting and staring at a wall. It was just more exciting to me to include the sounds of the city, the smells of the buildings, the smells of the trees, like the interaction with people, right? You're not necessarily silent in a movie theater. You're talking to people. That was a really exciting element to add to the basis of what a film or video can be is site specificity. Yeah.
So I guess now might be a good time to kind of get your definition of experimental film, because, we've talked about it for quite some time now. Yep. And I have a friend who's a musician. He works in radio up in Yellow Springs, Ohio, for those who aren't in this area. And he hosts an experimental music program and series and whatnot. And I love what he says about experimental music, which is experimental music isn't a specific sound. It's more like an attitude. It's like a mindset. I mean, what would you define as experimental film? Is it something like that, or like what people are used to film? Like, how does it relate to that?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that film and video can be experimental. There is the making of it. So what you're doing is you're breaking rules. What's nice about film is that the history of it is quite short. It's only been maybe 110 years or something, which I like. My brain likes that. My brain likes the fact that there's this very contained history that we can look back at and sort of see what things were established as rules, and then how do you break those rules. Yeah. So very early on, this, how to edit a scene together, where the camera goes, different composition styles, all of these things were sort of these rules that were created over the years. So in the biggest sort of way, it's experimental, just kind of breaks those rules. That can be in terms of exhibition, like where you see the films. It can be in terms of content or subject matter, what you're filming, what you're making. It can be in terms of what you're getting from it. So it's not going to necessarily follow the 3-act narrative structure and have actors and have, this traditional Hollywood sense of storytelling, which comes from literature. It's not going to have that, right? Now, you could make a very, interesting experimental narrative where you just tweak or play with one element. It doesn't have to just be flashing colors on a wall, right? Yeah. It can be. But what's nice is that it's so open-ended that it can be a lot of things. And you take any element, like we're talking about these choices, and you subvert it, and then that can be experimental. So I could make a completely, very conventional narrative film, but I could show it to you upside down.
Right.
Then what happens?
Yeah.
What happens to the work? What happens to you, the viewer? What happens to what it says? I mean, I don't know. But that's just the simplest idea of like, okay, we'll take one element and change it. Well, what if you take all the elements and change them?
Right.
So there's always the difference between what you're making and the filmmaker and their intention, and then how the viewer receives it. And that's also can be played with. Right. So
it's like, how much can you change about it before it's not a film or a video, but you've convinced people that it still is? Like, kind of like, what can you push to in that direction, right?
Yeah. Well, and you had mentioned at some point about earlier when we were talking and emailing about light is my medium. That's what I have in my artist statement. And because that is like the simplest thing I'm playing with, is the changing of light. Now that really gets back to just the fundamentals of photography. And when you're changing, when the emulsion on film is exposed to light, it transfers the image to it. So it's like, that's the most fundamental thing I'm playing with, is kind of the transferring of images. And then you get into all the other things that I'm playing with. But when you really get down to it, I'm interested in that, which there is an inherent melancholy when it has, to me, that has to do with filmmaking and picture making, because what you're doing is you're capturing a moment in time that will never happen again. When you're watching old films and old videos, you can kind of take it for what it is, but you can also watch it and think, wow, all of these people are dead.
Yeah. Right.
Like, this place is gone.
Yeah.
This moment will never happen again. And there's a sadness to that that can be there. But the fact that it was captured is sort of this very cool idea that it lives on, right? It's an after image. It's a ghost in a way.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. So much about what you're talking about resonates with me. And
That's so cool.
I'm so glad that we're sitting down to talk about it.
Yeah, I never get to talk about this stuff. So, yeah.
So you gave me the perfect segue to my next question, which is about this foundation of light in your work. And so when did you first begin thinking about light in this way? You kind of mentioned film emulsion and, kind of still photography, I guess you could say. Was it related to that or something else? And how has the role of light changed in your work over time, if it has at all?
I think the reason I settle on light as my main medium is the fact that I'm not really a filmmaker. I mean, I am, but I'm not, right? So when I tell people I'm a filmmaker, well, they just assume I make probably like indie films and the very conventional, because that's what society knows of what film is, right? And film festivals and things like that. So it's like, well, I'm a filmmaker and I make films, but really what I'm trying to do is kind of play with this medium in different ways. And fundamentally, so you're looking at an image that's like, at the basis of it, you have a blank screen. It's black. It's just dark. And what you're doing is forming it and changing it with the input of light. So it can be just values of light. It can also just, and then all of a sudden you have, if you're just imagining something developed, like a Polaroid picture, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden something emerges, right? So all I'm doing is kind of like playing with that emerging. What is that thing that's going to emerge? And like I said, it could be a certain subject matter. Like where the images come from can come from different places. So the different sort of image making that I use and where the light sort of is shifted can be an analog source. So it can be sort of more of a chemical reaction. So that would be more of the 16 millimeter kind of way of creating film, or shooting 35 still images. And then you think about different types of video cameras and things like that, where it's absorbing the light in different ways. So there's that idea where you're actually filming, it's original footage, you're on location, you're in different places, you're setting something up. But then I like to work a lot with found footage and this idea of the archive. So what are images that have already been made that I can recontextualize and use to say something new? I've done a lot of work with old family, like home movies. I've done a lot of work with images from, like, literally from archives of like pictures of maps and pictures of old slides that I've bought off of eBay, of someone's vacation, in Hawaii or, something like that. In terms of my own image making and like my own archive of work, I almost feel like I'm just an archaeologist. Like I already have I have a lot of things in my life that are interesting in terms of the actual photograph or the actual video or whatever. And it's like, how can I sort of dig back in, whether I use those actual images or I use them as an influence, or look at what I already have and see what something new I can make. So I don't know if this really answers your question about light, but it's the easiest way for me to kind of fundamentally talk about what I'm manipulating.
Yeah. Can you give like an example of the role of light in your work, like kind of what we're talking about here? Yeah.
So like, for instance, I did a piece, I think it's called "The Clouds Are Slowly Drifting" or something like that. And I was interested in the materiality of paper. Okay, so you have a piece of paper, and then like, how do you make an image from a piece of paper? How do you make it come to life? So somehow I figured out, okay, I'm going to use a scanner. So I'm using these scanners to create depth through these kind of layers of pieces of paper. And all of a sudden, you look at I'm filming these scanners with this light. So it's a light. This kind of very specific light that's moving very slowly. But what it's doing is it's creating these landscapes. And from literally just pieces of paper that I've ripped up. So all of a sudden, your mind and the viewer is kind of going to a different place, and they're going to this outdoors, kind of like these other worlds. But really all I'm doing is just manipulating an object, the piece of paper, and then the light behind it. And so it's kind of like, can I use that light in a new and interesting way? And that was just kind of an experiment that I ended up just loving how it looked and how it felt and how simple it was, but how kind of complicated it got.
Yeah.
So that's just like a really simple example,
right,
of using light in a different way.
Yeah, I think this question of light jumped out to me. First of all, anytime anyone says something is like a foundation of their work, that's like immediately the most interesting thing to me, because that kind of implies that everything you do is built off of that, right? But also when we think about light, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but like when we go to the movies and we're watching a movie and there's lighting, of course, I almost feel like it's one of those things that like, if someone is doing their job correctly, you don't even notice that. So the fact that you're kind of building everything you do off of that and kind of bringing attention to perhaps something we take for granted, I mean, that's really interesting to me.
But it's used, in more conventional work in order to create a seamlessness or kind of create a world building where you don't notice it.
Yeah.
But like what I'm trying to do is like, can you notice it? Can you actually use it? Can you like form it and change it and kind of, I mean, that's why I like projectors. All of a sudden you have in your hand you're projecting an image and you can like literally shine it on the ceiling, shine it on the floor, shine it onto, in undergrad, I projected onto a moving train.
Yeah.
I brought my entire class out, one of the video classes, art classes that I took, and we were in the middle of winter, and I had planned this thing and found this place and figured out the train schedule, and we basically projected onto this underpass of a highway, waiting for the train to pass, and it literally was like 30 seconds, and it was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and I made it, and it was so cool, and that I got to project onto a moving train.
Yeah.
Now, who does that? I mean, I don't know where I come up with this stuff, but it was very selfish of me. I wanted to see it with my art. I had this, can I do it? What does it do to the image? What does it do to the viewer? That fundamentally is I'm shining a light on an object and just seeing what happens.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of, I mean, that's fundamentally what filmmaking is and film, I shouldn't say filmmaking, film viewing, exhibition.
Yeah.
It's a projection. It's a light. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm getting the sense that there is like maybe a relationship between analog media and digital media in your work in some way. And, this is also like there's analogies in music for this. There's acoustic, there's electronic, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really interested in this. And, I initially when I was thinking about this question of analog versus digital, I was thinking about like the 16 millimeter film versus like a digital camera, that kind of a thing. But then you're talking about paper versus like a digital scanner. You're talking about like projecting something onto a train, which a train is like an analog object in a certain way. So, I mean, is this kind of a thread that's stayed with your work in a certain way?
Oh, absolutely. I think it mostly comes out in a variety of ways. So it's interesting. So I was born in the early 80s, and so I remember a time, and I'm sure a lot of people say this, but I remember a time when there weren't cell phones, right?
Right.
So there's this kind of push and pull between how the technology not only affects daily life, but also like the actual act of filmmaking. So like my first, in the early 2000s when I'm in college, I mean, I remember giving an assignment to a teacher on a VHS tape. And then I learned how to make movies with mini DV tapes.
Yeah.
Which is sort of an analog digital combo.
Yeah.
And so I've been sort of cognizant of all of these technology changes, but also kind of holding on, being sort of tethered to the older media, because to me, I'm interested in what that media kind of, how it tells a story.
Yeah.
I'm kind of considered the family archivist in my family, and my grandparents, specifically on my dad's side, saved everything, like absolutely everything. And so when they passed away, I was sort of put in charge of kind of looking at everything. So all of the photographs, all of the letters, all of the old film, like, you know, it's just interesting to look at those things and be able to reflect on a life and get the meaning from that, right? It helps you kind of create a picture of who someone was and who they will be when they're gone, you know, once they're gone. So I have this kind of like, this idea that, you know, like the books that you have, the CDs that you own, the newspapers that you read, like all of these things tell a story.
Yeah.
And so there's a show that I had at the West End Gallery in the Aronoff a few years ago. It was kind of my first big solo show, and it was called What Makes a Life. And what I did was I took an inventory of all of the physical media that I own. Like every book that I own.
Wow, yeah.
Every literally like CD or record, every single thing that I owned, I kind of made a list of, because to me that tells a story in that moment of who I am and how I got to where I am.
Yeah.
Right? When you listen to a certain song, when you read a book, when you watch a movie, like it kind of like it gets absorbed into your bones, whether it was like influential or not. It's just sort of in our bodies.
Right.
And the reason I did that is because I felt a tension between this new idea of streaming. So right now, there's sort of no record of what we're watching and consuming.
Right.
There's no record. It's just, it goes into our body, and there's no, like, unless you buy the book or have the physical part. So it's like the physical versus the digital. Like there's a tension there that I wanted to explore. Because I think that if you can't sort of, not that you can't track, but if you can't recollect on what people are reading and watching and consuming, it sort of changes the story society's telling. And then you bring in AI. Right. And at the moment, 5-6 years ago when I had this show, I didn't know the term AI and sort of what it was, and it's sort of gaining steam, obviously. Right. So I use the terminology algorithm. So these algorithms are changing the media that we're consuming. They're changing critical thought. They're changing how we think, right? Yeah. And I was uncomfortable with that. So that's what that show to me was about. All the different pieces were this idea, this tension between the analog and the digital, and then you throw in there, okay, how do you make art from that, right? Yeah. So, for instance, I did a piece that my grandfather had taken some pictures, 35 millimeter pictures, and there were some slides, and they were double exposures. So they were images that actually never were real in real life, because in the processing of them, they were like, it's like a tree here and a flower here, and somehow that when he took those images, they got layered. Right. So it's an image that actually never existed, right? So I'm starting with this physical slide, I scan it, and then what happens to that slide? What happens to that image that never existed? So then I end up recording it on a VHS tape, and then I record it again, and I record it again, and I record it again, and all of a sudden the image disappears, right? So through this process of analog, but like also like constructed degradation of the image, I'm taking as something that never actually even existed, even though I had it in my hand, the slide. Yeah, right. And then I'm putting it through this process of this kind of, change, how the technology, the hardware can kind of change something slowly. And then eventually it just becomes, after, I think it's like an hour, it's just lines on a screen. Yeah. It's just gone.
That's wild.
Yeah. So like I'm always kind of fascinated by that, the tension, like you're saying, between the digital and the analog. I don't know. It comes out in different ways in all my work, but that's just one example.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I mean, what you're saying about streaming, I mean, I have like this love-hate relationship with streaming. And I'm thinking like specifically music, but also, like Netflix and all the streaming services there, where, I was listening to all this different music and discovering it, 10 years ago when I didn't have any money, but I could afford a streaming service. And now that I've my career's picked up steam and I have a little more money, I'm going back and I'm buying like the records of the albums that I fell in love with, even if I don't listen to it anymore. And now it's like anytime I travel or anytime, I discover something that like blows my mind, it's like, okay, I need a physical copy of this. And especially now we don't have to comment on the state of affairs in the world and at the end of or middle of March 2025, but I'm kind of seeing it as like, this is like, if I lose access to the internet, if I lose access to power, power is like its own thing, but, if I lose access to these different things in some way, at least I have a physical copy of it. I mean, it's kind of like building out my own archive, like what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And because if everything is streaming and everything is not tangible, like, I don't know, like does it exist? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting too is being on your podcast, thinking about music. Like I had a very good friend in undergrad, Heather Radke. She's an incredible writer. She wrote about music. And I remember asking her once about her big project. She was doing something about the history of folk music.
Yeah.
And I remember her commenting like, how do you write about something that is actually not, it's like so abstract and ephemeral. Yeah. It's like the music, the sound is like there and then it's gone. But it's affected culture so much and affected history so much. Like there's the documentation of it and the remnants of it in people's lived experience. But really, can you touch music? Right. No. And so I just remember that really resonated with me when she told me that, because it's very similar to film. Yeah. And I think my changing attitudes towards filmmaking and video making and the digital part of it, really, it is that sort of wanting to hold something and wanting to kind of feel something, because it's so, the light is on and then the light is off and then that's it, right? So it's like, it's not an object that you hold or that you can kind of see, and that can be sort of frustrating to me. I've never been an object maker. I went to grad school at the Art Institute in Chicago. I can't draw or paint. I've never been a fine artist. So my art is really in pushing invisible buttons. Yeah. That's what I do. But as I get older, there's a coldness to that. And maybe that has to do with me, ties into the journey of me becoming a mom and wanting to hold something. And that my latest film, which is called This Is a Movie, there's probably the most impactful line for me that is in there that I wrote was, it's like, this is about looking at something flat when you want to hold something round. Right. So it's almost like the inability of the medium to really capture what I want it to right now is, I'm a little bit disappointed in filmmaking and video making and I think it actually has to do with the technology, and that kind of ties into this project of failed technology. So I've had a lot of hard drives fail over the last couple years, and that's really hard to process. I'm mourning these projects and this footage and these things that I put a lot of time and effort and love into, and they're just gone. And it's just, I don't even know how to wrap my head around it.
Well, in hearing you talk about like failed hard drives, I certainly have hard drives I can no longer access from like grad school and undergrad and like from years and years ago. but something that has happened in at least the composition world is there's like 3 major softwares that we use to create sheet music. And I'm the kind of composer, I really love to write everything by hand. That's something that I was pushed to do in grad school, and it like changed everything. And so like having that tangible kind of pen to paper is very important to me, but I still have to, like when you write something in Microsoft Word or something, you still have to have like a digital copy to send to people to work with. And one of the big 3 music notation softwares, and it was the one that I use, and a lot of people I know, I guess like a third of the people use it. It was announced that they would stop developing the software, but here's like a code to learn this new software, which is like totally different intuition and that kind of thing. And so this was maybe 4 months ago that this was announced, and now everyone who used that software is in this zone where it's like, okay, we have these files that we need to figure out what to do with. And we can't update our computers, because if we update our computers, it'll brick the software that we are using that's no longer being developed. And, oh, by the way, now I have to learn this new software. And it's like, that's technology. It's like, it's like none of us anticipated that this 30-year-old software company would decide to stop developing. And now like people have built their entire careers off of it, and they're trying to figure out like strategies to cope with it.
Oh yeah.
It's
so you're like beholden to this thing. Like it's so hard. It's so hard to keep up with, and it changes. Like more than 10 years ago, I forget when it was, but for instance, Final Cut Pro changed dramatically from like Final Cut 7 to whatever it became. And then all of a sudden it took years, and everyone had to kind of change over to Premiere. And it just, like, I'm like, no, I've been doing this for years and years and years. I'm a pro at Final Cut Pro.
Yeah.
Why do I have to start over and learn all this new stuff in Adobe Premiere?
Yeah.
And I did, and I'm fine, and I got through it. But for that time, you're like, you have these tools, and you learn the skill, and it becomes part of your practice because you have practiced.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're mid-career and you have to change, and you have to, and it's just can be really hard when you're so reliant on that. So that's another reason it kind of like, it makes me think, well, I'm just going to shoot 16 millimeter film now because that at least I can touch it and hold it and,
Yeah.
But with my latest project, one of the hard things was I had all of these transfers of the 16 millimeter films that I had never finished, and those were on the hard drive. One of the hard drives that failed. So then I ended up having to project the films onto a wall and then film them in order to include them in this latest project. I don't have the money to transfer them again. At least I found them in the darkest corner of my studio. I was able to find the actual film, but that's also can be tricky. Are they still okay?
Right.
Films can disintegrate as well and be damaged and be scratched and all the things. So Tyler, we're not safe. Like, there's just always, these things that we have to battle.
Oh my God, yeah. Tyler here, and if you're enjoying this episode of Music Maker, well, just know that I've got a short form show called Micromaker. Think of it as a distilled version of these conversations, focused on powerful insights that you can listen to anytime. New episodes twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. Give it a follow. So much of what you just kind of touched on, especially with like your latest project, and I want to put a pin in and certainly come back to in a moment, but one of the questions that I always ask everybody, and it's a question that by the time I get around to asking it, I feel like people have kind of indirectly answered. So think about this as more like a more direct question about these things we've been talking about. But what would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice?
I think ultimately in grad school, I remember being in some kind of a conversation or a class or something about why we make art, why we make film, why are we doing this? And I remember saying something about, well, I do it for self-expression. And it almost got like a reaction like, really? Like what? Like
why would you ever do that?
Yeah, right? And it's just, it's in my nature. Like, I am a really, in a way, I can be very sort of hard and strong, but I'm also kind of fragile and sensitive, and I'm a feeling person. And to me, film and art is really just about self-expression and its processing, right? And that can come out in a variety of ways. And sometimes it's not even art. It's taking a walk.
Yeah.
It's baking. It's cooking. It's just sitting in nature. Like, there's sometimes it doesn't have to kind of manifest as a piece of art. It can manifest in a lot of different ways of how I process and how I express myself. And so I think I have the pillars of the sort of foundation of my art practice is that it's not the most important thing in my life.
Yeah.
Like, I think some people, it's like, well, I have to do this and I have to, and I do, but I'm less rigid about that. I've become a little bit, I wouldn't say cynical. Maybe you kind of used the word jaded at some point earlier.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just a little bit wiser in certain ways about what my art practice means to me. And I have felt that I've had to let go all of the preconceived notions that I had about where I would be in my life at this time and what my art practice would mean to me and how many shows I would get and how many awards I would get and how many film festivals I would be in. Like, it's never been that important to me to show the work. It's always been more important to me to make the work. And so rather than pressure myself to constantly be inspired and then produce something, like, sometimes I have so many ideas, I can't even, like, it's too many.
Yeah.
But sometimes all I need to do is think through something. Like, I can have this idea and it's like the best idea I've ever had. And then I think about it and I think about what I would make, and then it's done. I don't have to make it. I processed it.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't help other people access it, but, like, at least it's a way for me to, like, not put so much pressure on myself to constantly produce. So the pillar of my practice now is, let's not take it so seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah. Like, let's be a well-rounded individual. Let's not just have this one question and try to answer it for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
Let's go with it.
Yeah.
Go with the flow.
Well, and I think I've probably talked about this on this podcast before, but I have a mentor who, I don't know if I told this specific story on this podcast, so I'll share it now. Back in the pandemic, I was one of those people who downloaded Duolingo, and I've always loved, like, Japanese culture and media and that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I'll learn Japanese finally. And that evolved into, like, me getting pretty serious about it and taking lessons at one point for a stretch. And I wasn't, like, composing at all, really. I mean, it was the pandemic, so a lot of those projects kind of fell by the wayside. But I remember, like, talking to my mentor about it once, and I was like, yeah, I kind of feel guilty because I'm using my time and resources and money and bandwidth to do this thing that has nothing to do with anything else I do. And he said, that's not right. Like, it has everything to do with everything else that you do, because you're kind of curating your life. You're leading an artistic life, and it doesn't matter if you're learning a language or if you're baking or if you're doing whatever. It's all because you are doing it, and you are kind of an artist in your heart, not to be too, like, floored about it, but he's like, because you're at your core an artist and artistic, like, that makes everything that you do art making in a certain sense. Yeah,
that resonates with me, absolutely. And I think getting away from academia that's its own, like, bubble of and I thought maybe at some point I would be a teacher and be a professor, and I kind of have adjunct, and taught at that level. And what I like about it is the teaching part and not necessarily the other part.
Yeah.
But, you kind of get, if you're not embedded in a world where, like, art making and thought intellectual like curiosity and whatever is like the main way of living. If you kind of are away from that a little bit, it kind of, I mean, I have been away from it, and I wanted to be away from it. Like, I didn't want to be in a bubble, because there's like this other greater sort of reality of how to live a life, right? And what you're talking about is this living a life creatively where that doesn't go away. Like, it's a way, like you're saying, it's a way of living. And you have to have something to make art about.
Yeah.
So whatever next piece you might compose might have a heavily Japanese or Asian inspiration. Who knows?
Right.
You know, it could have to do with the way the Japanese is spoken and the syllables and the, you know, like all of the, who knows what is going to influence you. And that mentor of yours is very, you know, very smart, because it's true. Yeah. It's very true.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on this earlier when you're talking about your friend who writes about music and it being kind of like this ephemeral sort of thing. But what came to mind is, you know, film and music, along with just a few other art forms, I guess, they're dependent on like being expressed through time. Like, you're kind of like, you're stuck with it. You know, you have to like sit through it and stuff like that. And so in your artist statement, you say that you're drawn most to the concept of duration built into the viewing experience. So, you know, that was really interesting to me, because it seems like, I mean, music certainly has to be like dependent on duration. Can you kind of explain what this means in the context of what you do?
You know, that's the part of film that I think is interesting, and music, because it's this other layer, this other choice to make, right? How long something is going to be. There's a tremendous amount of power in making work that is performative and that is based on time, because you are demanding the attention of the viewer, right? Yeah. And so it's kind of a little bit scary sometimes, especially if you make longer work, or if you make something that builds. You sort of need to demand the viewer to sit there and watch it, right? And get and absorb it. So I just think that's a really interesting element that you don't get with two-dimensional work, but it's also interesting to kind of play with that. So that's why I kind of like video installation in some ways, because sometimes you're dealing with work that loops, right? And like, you get to decide how long that loop is or what it looks like, but what you're doing is kind of combining the traditional, well, I'm going to go to a gallery or a museum and I'm going to walk around, and I get to decide as the viewer how long I stand in front of a painting, because that medium doesn't demand me to do that. I can look at it for 1 second, or I can look at it for 3 hours. I get to decide. Yeah. You know, and so what I kind of like this idea with video installation is you're projecting something in a gallery, or you're projecting something on the side of a wall outdoors. The viewer gets to decide. They get to come, they get to engage with it for a minute, or they engage with it for an hour, and then it's another kind of like build your own adventure, right? Because I didn't love the fact that traditional cinema is, okay, a movie is 90 minutes, you go in, you sit down, you watch it, you leave, right? That wasn't that interesting to me, because to me that was something you can play with and kind of explore. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes as a filmmaker, you want someone's full attention. You want them to be enveloped into a world. You want them to follow the narrative and be with you. And, you know, that's why I love Terrence Malick's work. The worlds that he creates in the music, I mean, it's almost, it is religious in a way. Like you are kind of enveloped for 3 hours,
right,
you know?
Right.
And like that is its own thing. And I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. There are master filmmakers and artists who can do that. I can't, right? I like to think about time and duration and how to play with it, you know, and it's just another element, another choice. And music has to do with that too, you know, like there's a piece that I made in grad school called Everything is Connected, and I wanted people to really think about the relationship between sound and silence. So it's interesting, when I look back at my work, I think I make the most important work when I'm actually questioning the media itself. And also questioning kind of what I'm going through and looking through that as a way to express how to process something, right? So when I talk about this piece, everything is connected, you can't have silence without sound. So if you're looking at an image, what's the difference between when there's no music and there is music? But then what's the difference between when there's no image and then there's an image, right? So it's like I wanted the viewer to kind of be very conscious of that. And can you rip those things apart and put them back together all in the same piece, and then also kind of like question what happens when that traditional kind of movie making idea of like a big landscape and then you have this music playing on top and like it's just this kind of this like ethereal thing, right? But like what if you kind of just like destroy that,
right.
and tear it apart and deconstruct it?
Yeah.
And so like it's just an interesting other thing to play with.
I think much like the question of light, I mean, duration can be something that I think if you do it to like in a traditional sense, if you do it right, no one thinks about it,
Yep.
And so that's why I'm like interested in this question of duration. And I mean, certainly I would imagine that like pacing has to do, I mean, how do you contend with pacing in your work as part of this thought of duration?
Yeah, well, it depends, it depends on what the project is. It depends on what the form is. Like, for instance, I don't make a lot of just standard movies that you just sit and watch, but my latest project is. It's 7 minutes. It's called This Is a Movie, and it's what it really is sort of a funeral to all the films and the projects I've never made and never finished, I should say, and the projects I will never make. And so, as much as I'm saying about, okay, try not to like take all of this too seriously. I mean, I have projects that haunt me because they're not done, or ideas and thoughts that I never was able to kind of, because of life circumstances and like and resources and money and time, right? Like I just haven't been able to get to, and maybe the moment has passed that I ever will get to them. And so that one specifically, pacing to me is choreography and it's breathing, and so it kind of gets back to when I used to do a lot of editing where you kind of are breathing through something and you're looking at something, and it could be really fast paced. I mean, like,
right.
like lots of cuts. And it could have to do with the music and how that, if there is music or not, or what, it's interesting to like create a video, edit it to music, and then take the music away and then watch it silent. And like, what does that do? Like, that's an interesting way to, pace something and edit something. So it's like a rhythm, it's a feeling. It just depends on the project. I mean, I like to think that these ideas and this art, they have their own, in a way, this kind of their own voice. And it will tell you what it wants to be.
Yeah, right.
Like, you have choices as the artist to make these things, but then also it kind of like responds to you in a way. I know that sounds kind of wacky.
No, it's completely true. And I mean, the thought that just occurred to me is there's always like the balance in the moment where like it's like a pivot moment where you can't let the art speak to you unless enough of it is there.
Yeah.
And then at that point, things get like it's really difficult to get to that point. And then I think once you kind of see the big picture, I mean, that's like the struggle that I have a lot with my work is getting to that point. And then once I get to that point, it's kind of smooth sailing from there. It's like, okay, I kind of understand what's happening. But I think, I've been thinking a lot about pacing lately because I don't know if it's like because I'm getting older or because it's like I almost feel like it is that, but also me kind of responding to how like a lot of my life is like deadline oriented and super busy, and I never have bandwidth for anything. But it's just like the music I make, I want it to be like more drawn out. I want notes to last longer. I want things to linger like kind of in the air. I want more silence. And so my pacing is evolving, and it's something I've been paying attention to for the past couple years or so.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm interested in like hearing your thoughts on pacing. And like, it never occurred to me that pacing was like a part of intuition, but or like analogous to the act of editing, which is also something I do a lot of, audio editing. And it's like, yeah, that's like a really hard thing to teach. I mean, to be honest, I probably need like an assistant editor for this podcast, but I don't know like how to convey how I do what I do to someone to gain enough trust for someone else to do it.
Oh yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah, I think it also has to do with our bodies, in like our body's ability to respond, right? So like, and being very present. And I've never necessarily been a person who's like into yoga and meditation and all those, like being in touch with your body, but I also have done that. I have done yoga and meditation, and like it's gotten me through a lot of hard things. I think for me, getting older is about being more present. And I think when you're more present, you can sort of appreciate that, like the notes that are drawn out. You can appreciate the silence. You don't have to always fill it things with something. Like it's okay to kind of be quiet. My latest film is silent, but there's text on screen. And so it's sort of this like film poem in a way. And it's because I wanted, in people's heads, I wanted them to be reading the text, and I wanted them to be fully engaged with that text. I didn't want music or sound to be a distraction. Yeah. Because to me, I wanted it to be that focus. Like the piece just didn't need sound. It just, once again, we're talking about like I've sort of had the idea for it and put together, I wrote the script, and then it was like, now what? Now sound. And it just like, it told me, it was like, it just doesn't need it. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know if I got off topic, but.
No, not off topic. I mean, it's the perfect segue to, I wanted to talk about this film of yours because you sent it to me not quite a week ago, I think, ahead of this interview. And it's going to be shown at the Athens Film Festival, right? So congratulations. Yep. Athens, Ohio. Yeah. And in preparing to speak with you, I watched it, and it just like absolutely blew me away. You've touched on it here and there already, but I didn't want to like quite go down the rabbit hole of it because I feel like there's so much to talk about just in like the 8 minutes that you created, and just to be like completely vulnerable. I mean, it like stunned me. I like sat in my office watching it in silence, and just like tears came to my eyes because so much about it just spoke to like me in my current moment of art making. And so I hope that it gets a wide audience for that reason. But I'd love if you could just share, like, I guess, I don't know if spoiler alert even exists with a piece like this, but share what you feel like you can about this piece, what it's about, because I think in talking about this, it'll take our conversation in some really important directions.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for watching it. I think you're only like the third or fourth person to view it. So the film is called This Is a Movie. And when you kind of fundamentally look at what I've done, I've taken footage from 9 or so unfinished projects. Because I kind of mentioned before, like, projects that I haven't been able to finish sort of haunt me in a way, because it's just kind of lingering. It's lingering questions I want to answer. It's lingering. It's like footage I've taken but don't know what form it's going to take. Since the pandemic and even before, I also had kind of my own burnout situation. I was running a nonprofit, a small microcinema, and it was just hard. Life was really hard for a long time. And so like the last thing you want to do is kind of like, not that there's a choice, it's like you can't. Art making is such a privilege to have the space and the time and the resources to do it. And I think sometimes we forget that. Yeah. When you're talking about like survival and just trying to like get through the day and feed yourself and just like deal with mental health issues or physical health issues or family issues, it's like art making can just kind of not be at the forefront.
Yeah.
So, I haven't made any work in a long time. I filmed a lot of things over the last few years. And one of the things that I did film was infertility journey. So when I was in my late 30s, I really it was time. Like, I wanted to have a baby. And it's something I've always known I wanted to do is be a mom. But because of circumstance, I just hadn't met a partner yet. So I decided to go a certain route, which it's called single mom by choice. So I've decided to have a kid on my own. It wasn't my first choice, but I'm just so happy that I did.
Yeah.
But it took a lot out of me. It took 3 years to have my son. And for anyone who's been through infertility or just any fertility, like, it is just a hard road, and it's physically taxing, it's mentally taxing. It is the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And the fact that I got through it is sort of a miracle. Like, I feel like almost in shock a little bit that I'm sitting here. And so, that, like, I filmed a lot of that, the shots, and because I had to do IVF, and so I filmed a lot of that, but not knowing what it was going to be. And I only did that for the first round because then it just got too hard.
Yeah.
And you're just, it's just, so a lot of this new film is kind of reflecting on that experience that, like, I had this project, I had this intention, I filmed these things. What form was it going to take? Was anyone ever going to see it? Once again, it just sort of haunted me. So I decided, okay, can I make a short film? I mean, really what happened is, like, the words just sort of tumbled out of me. And I kind of ended up writing this sort of poem that was edited down from, like, pages and pages and pages. So I kind of distilled it down to this little script. So text on screen appears, and then I have these images from these unfinished projects. Just one of them is the infertility footage. There's a film I was going to make about Aeneas Nin, and she had written this poem about the world being round. And so I had all this footage about this incredible project I was going to make, and I just never made it. I never finished it. I have a lot of the 16 millimeter footage that I took years ago that I wanted to make into something, and I just never did. Like, it's sad. It's, like, hard to let those things go.
Yeah.
And so when I decided to make this film, it became the most cathartic experience to all of a sudden just let myself move on. So I took all of these kind of, like, tidbits from all these different films, and then I made this film, and I kind of recontextualized it and literally gave myself permission to let go and to move on. And from doing that, I now feel really free. A lot of it wasn't purposeful. Like, we talked about lost hard drives and technology that fails. And there's a little bit of a metaphor that I put in there about, failed technology and failed bodies, because this is also me processing the last few years of going through this infertility journey and just some really, really hard personal things. And so all of it is just so connected in an interesting way. And I watched the film and I'm still surprised by what I find.
Yeah.
It still affects me, which is a very cool feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
to keep getting things from it and watching it. And it's also a film about making a film when you don't have time, right? So it's like, I had this internal pressure to finish these films, this internal pressure to still be a filmmaker, even though my primary focus right now is a business owner and a mom. And I have these artistic ambitions and these things inside me and these feelings I want to express, and I don't know how to do it. So then I made a film about that.
Yeah.
And that usually is the thing where, I think I started this thought earlier, where making a thing about the uncomfortable feeling is actually where I get most of, like, I think I make my best work.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in grad school, my thesis was about expanded cinema, which is basically installation, film and video installation and performance. I was reading about the history of all of these famous performances in this famous artwork, and I was so frustrated because I couldn't be there. And I'm looking at pictures, and I'm reading, and I can't be there. I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
So then guess what? I ended up writing my thesis about how documentation doesn't live up to being there.
Yeah.
I made a thing about the thing that was, so this film is, I'm making a film about the thing that's bothering me, that's bringing me down, that's frustrating me. And in the process of looking at that, examining it, making it, guess what? I made a film.
Yeah. Well, I think, I hope it's fair. I think it's fair to acknowledge that there does seem to be something meta about it. Mm-hmm. I mean,
for sure.
You pretty much just said that.
Yeah.
And as I was watching it, you have the typed out text, you have the images, and the moment that shook me to my core, which I think happens pretty early on, I think it's like within the first minute or so, is it says, this is a movie about all the movies I never made, this is a movie about all the movies I will never make, and this is a movie about not having time to finish a movie, and so on. And so, for me, I've been working on a piece of music. No one asked me to write it, which is rare. It's kind of been instilled in me that, like, you shouldn't do work for free, and you shouldn't do work without a plan to have someone, like, whether a commission or... And certainly, I feel like it's a piece that I have enough people in my corner that it will see the light of day. But because there's no deadline and it's like my own kind of impetus, I guess, I've been working on this for like 3 or 4 years at this point. Mm-hmm. And it's evolved from like, I don't really like the direction this is going in. I feel like it needs to be different than it's ended up being like a piece about me changing as an artist, mm-hmm. much like your piece kind of is. And so, like, once I realized that, this was like a year ago. and to be fair, I'll like stop working on it for long stretches of time and come back to it and that kind of thing. And I think that's helped me kind of coalesce these thoughts about it. But it's ended up like, it feels like once I finish it, I'm going to be in a different place than I was when I started it. Mm-hmm. And I now know what I have to do. But for the past year that I've known what to do, I haven't had the time to do it.
Yep.
And so, again, I said this earlier, as those lines appeared on the screen, tears came to my eyes because I knew exactly what, I can't relate to the infertility stuff, though that part of it is moving and it's all connected in the piece. Yeah. But like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I think like artistic loss, or whether that's like the loss of something that was, or the loss of a potential thing, it's something that, at least in my experience, artists don't talk about. You don't talk about it in school. Yeah. You don't really talk about it with friends. You certainly don't talk about it with strangers.
Right.
And so again, this is why like your work devastated me in like the best way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I don't know, had you thought about, I mean, it sounds like the piece kind of just like came together to say what it needed to say, but had you thought about loss in this sense, like prior to this project, or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my entire life has been about loss for many years, but it's loss with gaining wisdom and gaining acceptance, right? So I think when you're younger, now I'm in my early 40s. It's not like, I still have a lot of things to learn and a lot of things to go through. But over the last 20 years, it's been a really interesting way to kind of think about art making, filmmaking, as it relates to a quote unquote career or profession, as it relates to why I do it. Because it changes constantly. Like you're saying, like if you don't have a commission, you don't have a show, you don't get a grant, like whatever it is, it's like, it's the world kind of, I don't know, I have slowly, and this might happen to you, like I've slowly just sort of, I don't care if anyone sees my work anymore. because I've never wanted to be. That's not true. I think early on, like, if I could choose anything, of course I would be a professional artist and filmmaker, and I could make a living doing it.
Yeah.
Of course I would. Anyone who does this would want that. But it's not the reality.
Right.
And so and it takes a very certain type of person and drive and money and resources and luck.
Yeah.
For people to do this for a living. So I've slowly kind of accepted that. So then it's like, okay, well, where does art making fit in my life, right? And if I'm going to disengage from it as a professional means of making money or a professional means of kind of like being relevant or being present in the culture, because I also have a really complicated relationship with art making and ego. And like part of me, like, it's like I'm so proud of the things that I make, but I also like don't like to have attention on me, but like it requires it, and so like my work just kind of sometimes like no one sees it, and I'm okay with that actually now. But it's really sort of interesting for you to have such a strong reaction to this latest film, because for the first time in my life, it's like I don't care or didn't care what anyone else thinks, but I'm like, wait, maybe people can get something from it. Like, maybe I shouldn't lose all hope.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important message, if you could call it that.
Yeah.
And I mean, like throughout this conversation, like, and especially with what you just said about having time, resources, money. I mean, money's the main thing in a lot of cases. It brings to mind so many of my own, like. I mean, I love that you use the word haunted. Like, you're haunted by these things, because that's the feeling I have about certain things that, I'll apply for like a grant or some opportunity, and like those are so hard to come by. And then you see like the list, and it's the same people getting these things, and it's like, and I remember like getting a rejection at some point last year, and I feel I'd like to think that I'm pretty like thick-skinned with rejection. That's part of being an artist these days. But I just remember like letting myself grieve the day that I got the rejection, and just saying out loud, like, it feels like I never get to dream. Like, I don't get to have dreams about the art that I make, because I don't get the grants. I don't get the opportunities. I just have to deal with like whatever I can make in the moment,
Yeah, well, and I think that's what this film for me is a result of exactly that.
Yeah.
It's like, let's just let it go because I mean, the fact that I even got into a festival, the fact that I even like submitted to a festival is like a miracle. Like, I never do that anymore. Yeah. Or haven't done that. And it's because I had a really sort of traumatic experience with the film curator 15 years ago. And I said, I'm like, I don't want to be in the system of being judged that film festivals, like, that's what the process is, right? And so I've been really critical of the art, how money gets dispersed, how power is used in the arts, who gets chosen, like you're saying, who gets access. I really think that, and I tried to do this with the microcinema that I had. It was called the Mini Microcinema nonprofit, and even the nonprofit system is so messed up.
Oh, yeah.
So messed up. And in my own life, and then I was a curator for a long time, a film curator, and my fundamental way of wanting to be a curator is in direct reaction to the ways that I was treated, and I wanted to try to do it differently. And I really think that the art world is upside down. And I think what needs to happen in an ideal world is there are curators or frameworks or structures that actually see potential in artists and foster that. Yeah. Nowadays, it's all about the results. You're taking something that you already made and you're trying to get accolades, but what if you had support along the way? Right. Along the process,
It'd be amazing.
Right? Yeah. And so that's what I always tried to do with my cinema was like we'd have these open screenings and like people would come and show films and whatever, and I'd be like, oh, there's a spark, there's a person who has the spark of some potential, who has something to say, and they just need a little bit of love. So let me give them a little bit of love. Let's give them a screening opportunity. Let's have them curate something. And maybe that's going to spark them to the next opportunity, and the next opportunity. And so like, long story short, it's like I have gotten very disillusioned with the systems that are in place to support the arts.
Yeah.
And you can keep fighting and keep fighting and keep going, and you should.
Right.
Everyone should. But also, you can make things outside of that system, and they can still be important and relevant.
Yeah.
I made this movie with nothing. Literally nothing. Old footage, an idea. I made time, even though I didn't have a lot of time. It's like when my son would go to sleep at night, I would be like typing away on my phone, just trying to like write this thing and get it out of my system. And I just did it. I don't know where it came from, but I did it. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, working outside of the system is where I feel like I have found success myself.
Good.
The only downside is like all the money is in the system. Right?
Yep, it's true.
It's kind of catch-22, I guess, where you just kind of have to have resilience and know that like what you're doing is worth doing.
It's so sad that, like I was talking about the privilege of making art and having the time and the resources and the opportunity and thinking about, and that this gets into sort of art education and music education as well. It's like, how many amazing creators are there out in the world that exist and they just don't even know it?
Yeah.
It's so like devastating to me that there are going to be kids and teenagers and these people who just are so talented, they just don't even know it yet.
Yeah.
It's that potential inside, and it just takes systems to and people to kind of help foster that. And that's actually where mentorship comes in, and specific teachers have been really influential to me in my life and my career. But they also go through these same ups and downs, and like they're within the systems of so it's complicated, but we have to keep. In a way, it's like the work will find a way. Like the piece you're talking about that you've worked on for so long, like it will find a way.
Yeah.
It might take longer.
Well, I'm hoping that by the time people are listening to our conversation, it's done. But.
Yeah. But also like taking the internal pressure off yourself. It's so hard, easy to say, but so hard to do. And just knowing that like it's important to you and you'll get to it and But I also, like it goes back to, is the important part you making it, or is it the important part people seeing it?
Yeah.
Like, in my own work, I that's a really complicated question.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer, and I think every artist has their own answer to that.
If you really want to stay connected to what I'm building here, the best way isn't social media, actually. It's the newsletter. That's where I share new episodes, unfiltered thoughts about the creative process, ways to support the work, and whatever's coming next. You can sign up at looseleaftransmissions.com or through the link in the show notes. So kind of getting back to your film, this is a movie. Like you said, it's completely silent. And when you sent it to me, you pointed out this might be weird for your listeners because, this is I'll do air quotes, like a music podcast. Though my intention is to kind of branch out. It's always been to branch out to other types of makers. But I really love talking about silence. I mean, this is one of my favorite concepts, if you could say, in, I mean, not just music, but life in general, like kind of the negative space of things. And so what role would you say music or sound, what role does that play in your work? And what role does silence play?
The film that I made, it comes from a really personal place, but I've tried to make it as sort of personal, though that it is. I've tried to make it open-ended for other people to kind of access, right? So it's not so personal and so like TMI, like too much information that people either become uncomfortable or they just can't access it, right? So it's like, it's kind of these universal ideas, these sort of bigger picture things. A lot of it is implied. Like I put in my description about it that it's about motherhood, and my mom watched it and she said, there's nothing in there about motherhood. And I'm like, Mom, the whole thing is about like she's like, oh, I guess you don't have a lot of time anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but it's all, no, I do not use the word motherhood. I do not talk about actually having a child in it. It's all implied, but it also can be about a lot of things, about giving birth to a piece of art, right?
Yeah.
As well as a child, right? So long story short, it's like I use silence in this film because I wanted the space in people's heads to be clear enough to kind of meet me halfway. And each person is going to have a very specific experience with it, right? This is another reason why experimental film and art is interesting to me, because that's where it's made. Like, all the answers aren't given to you. Like, when you're watching a conventional narrative film, for instance, all the answers are there. Like, there's a very specific intention almost for every single choice that's made. But here I'm just like kind of giving you halfway, and you have to fill in the rest. So maybe that's what it's about. Maybe the silence is about having the viewer fill in the rest.
Yeah.
But like, you know, there's other projects where silence is used as a counter to the noise. Like, literally, it's like, you know, you have some music and then you don't. You have music, then you don't. Like you want, because you're creating tension, right?
Yeah.
I'm also interested in culture and pop culture. It doesn't always come out in all of my work, but sometimes it does because of my own love of music and film and you know, so, and my background in that, in terms of just like, my dad was is a really big music guy, and so like that was really important to me growing up. So I like using music in my film or in my work sometimes. In the show This Makes a Life that I had at the Westin, I used a James Brown song in one of the pieces, because it was like, when you're talking about analog versus digital, like, it is the most analog, messy, like, it was one of his live recordings of, you know, like, it is like heat and sweat and animalistic in this way that is like the opposite of computer screen that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Like, I used it because of it was like that, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted people to think about that, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think silence is just another tool, and it's another choice.
Yeah.
And the best composers, I think, use it in an interesting way. And the best filmmakers use it, don't see it as a negative. You see it as something that is actually very positive and can add something.
Yeah, I completely agree. No surprise there, but I think the composer who got me thinking about this, I think he passed away in the 90s. Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu, who I see as like, if you're familiar with like impressionistic composers like Claude Debussy and Ravel, like kind of these coloristic, like watercolor perceived through music kind of composers from the late 1800s. And then there's like a thread that leads itself to Takemitsu and all of his like Eastern influence being from Japan. He came out with a series of essays that I picked up when I was in grad school. Not an assignment. I just like was interested in his music and wanted to read his writing. And he talks a lot about silence and how he felt silence was like a confrontation with death. Mm-hmm. And I still don't know what that means exactly, but it feels important, you know, and it kind of kicks off my own thinking about silence and how to leverage silence to create tension or release, or just like convey the gravity of a moment in sound,
or just, you know, just like a presence.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of what I've been through the last few years, getting to the point where I am, it's caused like me to be more present.
Yeah.
And I think like that's why that choice to use silence in the film was like, you have to pay attention in that film. It's only 7.5 minutes. Like, you have to kind of be present and absorb every word. And this silence can help you do that. And maybe that gets back to meditation or something like that. But it's like less is more, right?
Yeah.
And what's as less as death? Right?
True.
So like you're getting towards these like very just like fundamental life and death.
Yeah.
And once again, like a line in the film is, this is a funeral to all the films I will never make or I will never finish. And I'm mourning those. And it is a death. It is like, but it's a rebirth. It's like me being able to kind of like let go of who I was and those ideas I had and being sort of excited for the future of what I haven't even made yet.
Yeah.
So even though I kind of give myself permission in the film to not make films anymore, I'm sure I'm going to make films again. I'm going to make art. As you're saying, like, creative people lead creative lives, and I can't not make. It might not take the form of art for a while. I might be focusing more on caretaking, which is its own sort of way of living and takes creativity and presence. And I love it. It's like the most favorite thing I've ever done is be a mom. So yeah, I don't know. Once again, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
no, it's about the discussion. It's about the journey.
Yes, right, yeah.
I mean, just out of my own curiosity, how do you go about procuring or just simply deciding on, when you do use music, what music to use? I mean, do you ever make the music yourself or collect the sounds yourself, like field recordings?
Yeah, so I'll have to think about. I have so many different types of projects I've made. Like when I was doing more commercial work with the production company that I ran, like I would work with composers and like that was a really fun experience to be able to kind of show them some visuals and kind of go back and forth and kind of get music made for a specific project. So much of my work has been site-specific, like outdoors, and so like music isn't a part of it or sound isn't a part of it. It's about the environment that the piece is shown in. There's been times, like for instance, I remember making a short animation in school that I just was obsessed with this like creaky old swing set near my house, and I went and recorded it one night and had my friend swinging and kind of took that sound and manipulated it. And I at some point during this conversation I talked about being an archaeologist, right? And sometimes I think the answers are already there. You just have to kind of go find them. There's a film that took me like 8 years to make, so you're good at 4 on your piece. And it was a film about my grandmother. It's called Guidance in the Art of Flower Arrangement. And it took a lot of different forms, that work. And eventually now it's like a 30 to 40 minute film that not very many people have seen. No surprise. But that piece, I have one of the films that I used to watch with my grandmother is called Singing in the Rain. And so we had an old music box that played that song and I recorded it. And, like I kind of found this music and it was kind of meaningful to me, but also kind of like matched the visuals in an interesting way. So yeah, to me, it's like the music part is kind of this fun bonus. It also doesn't always come first. Sometimes it's the visuals that come first. It really depends on the project.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, it really does. But it's very important to me. Yeah. Of course.
Outside of your art making, what role has music played in your life? I mean, have you played music? I mean, I'd assume that you love to listen to music.
Yeah. So I've never played music. I can't sing. No one in my family is that musical. I think that musicians and composers and what you do is like magic. Like I have no idea how people even sing. Like it's incredible to me because I can't do it. But for me, music has always been a part of my life, specifically because of my dad, which I think I mentioned earlier. So we grew up with a jukebox in the kitchen.
Oh wow! Nice.
So he's an incredible record collection. Back in the 70s, before I was born, and sort of actually in the 80s as well, he was actually a record producer. He executive produced, which is he helped, with the money. A few local, like Cincinnati folks that he helped out. So he, H. Bomb Ferguson was this incredible kind of like soul rock personality. So my dad helped with him with some of his records. Charlie Feathers was a rockabilly artist, and my dad produced some of his work as well. So like, my dad he's not just like a fan, like he wants to help, like see music being made and makers make. So I was always kind of around that culture of like, what's the mood you want to set and what music are we going to play?
Yeah.
He still to this day makes mixes.
Oh,
yeah. And I would help him burn. He literally still makes CDs for people and sends them
that's awesome.
out. He's almost 80 years old and he's like obsessed with it. And it's not just any specific genre, like everything from rock to, he was a huge Bob Dylan fan when I was younger. Now he's like into Leonard Cohen, he's kind of the natural trajectory.
Right.
And, all the like soul, Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson and James Brown and like all, Sam Green, like all of these incredible soul singers. But then he loves like we would listen to WOBO, like is it folk? I don't even know, like bluegrass, like Appalachian music. Anyways, long story short, I've just been around music my entire life, and I love to dance. So it's like, so there's that. But then I have my own favorites.
Sure.
And I love to. It's really fun now to play music for my son, and he's only a year and a half, but he likes to bop, like it's fun.
Nice.
So yeah, I don't know. It's just another part of this idea that media and consuming media and listening and watching, you don't have to be so serious all the time.
Yeah.
Like the TV show I'm watching right now is Severance. Everyone's watching Severance, and it's so good. I think. And like, I'm not confined to like this high art idea. Like I watch and listen to everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it all influences me in certain ways. I've never been like precious about the art that I like to look at.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was joking with a friend not joking, I was being serious, I guess, but it's kind of a joke. With a friend of mine recently about like my wife Susanna and I are both foodies. We love like experiencing food through like a cultural lens, I guess, or just anything experimental or with food. But like the spectrum, like we only live in the spectrums of that. Like we love like going to Costco and getting like a hot dog. And we love like, we just went to Japan and we had like amazing like multi-course meals there a couple of times. But we don't really love like going to like Outback Steakhouse, for example. And I feel like that's kind of like, I don't want to like call like Taco Bell trash food, but it kind of is. But like we love Taco Bell. I don't know what the media analogy to that is, the analog to that. Maybe like reality TV shows or something. Like we love watching those, and we love like really kind of high concept experimental stuff. And so I totally appreciate like what you're saying.
Yeah, and I've been in a lot of spaces that don't cater to, like, there's an intellectual elitism that actually is very off-putting.
Yeah.
And can make people feel dumb.
Yeah.
And that's not a good feeling. No one wants to feel that way. And no one wants to feel like they don't belong. And so, especially when you're dealing with experimental film, and when I ran my microcinema, like, the idea was let everyone's welcome, whether you know anything about this or not. Like, one way we're going to welcome people is, like, it's free.
Yeah.
There's no barrier. It's BYOB. We have popcorn. We have candy. Like, I always would give people permission to not be in the mood. I'm like, guess what? A lot of experimental films are short. It will be over soon. Yep. Close your eyes, it will be over. You might be like, nope, I'm not in the mood. I don't get it. I have no idea what this means. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Like, I am giving you, as the curator, as the leader of this organization, I'm going to give you permission to disengage, because sometimes you're just not in the mood. Like, you want to go home and watch the new Love is Blind.
Yeah.
You know, like that's okay.
Right.
You know, I do it too, right? So there's times where you can feel as a viewer that you want to engage and be challenged and think big thoughts and think conceptually and do research and try to figure out what something means. And there's other times where you just want to be so passive and just lay back and just like envelop me in the new Dune film. Like, I'm yours. Right. You know, like, just entertain me and scare me and make me, you know, laugh and cry and all the things. And all of that is absolutely okay. Like, it's okay. And I think as there's a melding of social media kind of into these different worlds, I think some of those barriers are coming down. I think younger generations like things a little bit more complicated. Yeah. Like, I can talk about a media theorist, but also be listening to Billie Eilish at the same time. Yeah. Like, can I do that? And like, yes, you can. Sure. You know.
Yeah, I dig it. So we're kind of talking about all this other media art, you know, that we like to consume ourselves. And one of the questions that I ask everyone is, I guess you could say, like, what is an artistic artifact? So, you know, in your case, probably a film, a book, maybe a song, piece of art, anything like that changed the way that you thought about your work, maybe even like changed your creative life in a lot of ways.
So when we're kind of talking about like being sort of well-rounded, right? Yeah. You know, like that one of my, like you said before, my pillars of my practice is sort of like, let's not take this too seriously and kind of just go with the flow of life. Yeah. I feel like I'm constantly, surprisingly influenced by things that have nothing to do with my actual practice. Yeah. You know, like, I love listening to Max Richter. And like, because I love to drive down the street in my car and pretend I'm in a movie. Right? Yeah. Like, or there's this other composer, I don't know how to say his last name, Gustavo Santaolalla. Do you know this composer? I don't. Okay, so he's incredible. And initially I learned about his work from the director Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, who's Mexican. So this composer is, Gustavo's like Argentinian. But like, there's something about his music that is sort of like comforting and warming, and at the same time sort of like off a little bit. Yeah. Where you're just constantly sort of surprised by the sounds he's making, and then like how it relates to visuals and stuff. So like, I like to, like, because this is a music podcast, like, one thing that I love to do is like listen to these sort of movie soundtracks. Yeah. While I'm out in my real world life and kind of make my own movies, right? Yeah. And that's what we're doing now. Everyone has earbuds in. Everyone's kind of making their own music videos. Yeah. You know? And I don't know if that even like relates to what I end up making in my practice, but what it does is kind of like creates these like interesting moments of where media can kind of like interact with daily life. That can be really nice. Oh, for sure. Yeah. It can really make a a hard day into a good day. Yeah. So it's like, okay, so there's this life I have, and I'm living it, and I'm often stressed out, and I'm often very tired. But are there things that I can sort of access that lift me up? If I'm healthy and able and like, you know, I've had issues with depression and anxiety and these things. It's like, if I'm there, then I can be a maker. Because like, if you're not, If you're not, then your productivity it's not going to be there, right? So it's like, can you like foster and care for all these other parts of your life and then they make you be able to be creative, and they give you the time to like dream, right? You're talking about dreaming and like having these ideas for these projects. So yeah, like I don't know, like I love gardening.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and I literally, like, I'm in my garden and I have my hands in the dirt and I'm thinking about these Terrence Malick films.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't want to watch the film. I want to be the film.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if this, once again, answers your question, but it's like absorbing this media, not just being a bystander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the sense, I hope this is okay for me to say, and to be fair, like this thought is still coalescing, so I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I mean, the way you talk about art making or consuming art, I mean, it's like, I want to say, I mean, this doesn't feel quite right, but it almost seems like a kind of like armor or certainly like an extension of just like daily life. Like, what does it mean to just exist? I guess that's like what it can and should be for like most people, but I mean, hearing the way that you talk about like art, using art outside of yourself to enhance like the inside of yourself, right? Or even the way you were talking about like being an archivist earlier, and like that seems like, I don't know, you've said that you don't see yourself as a filmmaker necessarily, but you seem like really like, but I to identify as like an archivist, and I think that kind of like goes in hand anyway in some way. I don't feel like I'm making sense, but I'm just going to keep rolling with it.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, I think what we're talking about essentially is the breaking down of like labels and roles.
Yeah.
And really, I think maybe this is why when I was younger, like I never actually, it was like I was a creative person and I was an artist and I was like sensitive and always kind of thinking and making, but I never had the label of like, well, I'm gonna go and be in this art class and now I'm an artist.
Yeah.
So it's like what we're talking about is like a way of living that is kind of more in tune with sort of like just growing and changing and like not labeling yourself to be just one thing.
Yeah.
Because, like, I've always known I'm a lot of things,
right?
You know? And I like experimental film, but I also like to watch football.
Yeah.
Like, someone would hear that sentence and be like, that doesn't make any sense. But I'm telling you, it makes sense. I'm sitting right here, and I exist, and those things can live in the same body.
Yeah.
So I've never kind of like fit into a trajectory or a box in terms of like my art career and my actual like what I do for work and like relationships, right? And even like having a kid on my own, like that's not normal, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to kind of like be true to myself and live a creative lifestyle, and I can't help but see things in a certain way, and that's just like how I am. I can't explain it.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I mean, we've been talking for some time. I'm at a point where I don't know if anyone else will. I think they will, but it doesn't matter because I'm enjoying sitting here talking with you. And so much of what you're saying is resonating with me. I've already said that, and I'll keep saying it. But it's like this difference between going through life with this kind of nuanced mindset. Like you're saying, like, I can be an artist and love football. Well, I've met artists who feel like that's an impossibility, you know, like, and then obviously there's people who in this world who are not artists. They might do any number of things, who see the world in a very black and white way. And there's other people who could be doing the same exact thing and see the world in this like highly curated, nuanced way that we're talking about. And so I think it's like an interesting dichotomy, like, acknowledging there are musicians and artists and people in academia, certainly, who are incapable of viewing the world in the way that we're talking about, you know, and I think that can come at an expense to somebody, themselves certainly, but other people as well. And so I think this is like a very interesting topic to have found ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of pushes against society in a way, because society is about money and power, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you take that sensibility, an artistic sensibility, and commodify it? Well, I've never been able to do that.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I tried really hard for many, many years to kind of keep pushing and like getting the shows and applying for the grants and like trying to get my name out there. And it just it wasn't sort of what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
And with that is going to be a level of, I will never be famous. That's okay. I will never be able to pay my mortgage from my art. That's okay. You know, like, it's accepting that, like, maybe I just don't fit into the system that's there, and like accepting it and being okay with it. And that's taken a lot of years to come to that realization. And like, almost like after finishing this latest film, I'm giving myself permission to let go of those dreams and let go of that trajectory and being okay where I am now. And that's like a new feeling.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of incredible to get to that point, because now I'm sort of free and I can just sort of see what happens in the future. So like, it's just a different kind of way of seeing productivity and art making, not as like, it's almost just like a performance.
Yeah.
Like, my life is, I'm curating. Every day is kind of this interesting moment, and I just happen to kind of look at it like that, and some people don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, with all of this in mind, something I'm always curious about when talking with people who do other kinds of art than I do is, how do you measure success or growth in your practice? And I think it's clear that that's not the way society measures growth, So, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Like, all I know is that there's a few key pieces of art that I've made. This latest film is one of them, that I feel so utterly, like, satisfied.
Yeah.
After me personally seeing it. And
right.
I made it, and I like, it worked through it, and whatever I intended, and then it's there, right? It's out from the brain, and like, it's there, and that is like a really wonderful feeling, and to me, that is success.
Yeah.
I have no hopes that it will be seen by a lot of people. I am absolutely thrilled it got into the Athens Film Festival. I'm absolutely thrilled that you got to see it, and I think I don't even know if I'm going to like put it online. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So to me, like, success it's kind of dependent on just like how you feel. Yeah. Like, and that changes, because there
right.
are moments in my career where I've felt like an absolute failure. Like, none of it was worth any of it. And no one cares. Well, frankly, most people don't care. And so, but if you care, then maybe other people will start caring.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. I don't know.
Well, I think something that you said that I think a lot of people, especially people who don't make art of any kind, of which there might be someone listening who fits in that category, but even people, a number of people who do, compose or do whatever, something you said that I don't think people realize is when you complete a piece of work of any kind, you're not always guaranteed that satisfaction of feeling like a sense of closure. Mm-hmm. And you're right, I can look through my body of work and point to just like a few pieces that's like, yeah, I felt that way with this one and this one and this one, and none of the ones in between. Mm-hmm. And even going back and listening to something that I wrote maybe like 5 or 10 years ago and being like, I remember feeling satisfied with this, and now I think it's like hot trash.
Yep,
you know, even though it like got all these performances and maybe won an award, or like I felt, or just innately felt good about it at the time. And so I think it's a really interesting thing for you to bring up, like, because I think like maybe ultimately success is satisfaction with the work that you do.
Yeah, but it changes.
Yeah.
And I also like to think about art and filmmaking as stepping stones. And so like I was helping a friend last year with he's a curator for a film festival, and we were watching submissions and things. And it's like and I hate that. I hate judging. Like I hate being judged and I hate judging, but you can have an opinion about something, right? But sometimes work, like a film or a piece of music, it just has to get made so you can make the next thing.
Yep.
And then the next thing, and then the next thing. Like it's just like a stepping stone for your own personal growth and your own questions you need to answer. And like, if you pull back and maybe like in the context of the history of art, maybe it wasn't the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
But like, it was necessary for you as the growth of a human, as growing as an artist, like maybe working with new materials or under certain circumstances or collaborating with people or whatever. It's just like, it just had to be made, right? And then there's this idea that like maybe some movies and some projects just don't need to be made.
Yeah.
Like just, like you can have the thought and then it can go away and then you're done. Or you try it and it's just not working and it doesn't feel good. And so, or you have these deadlines, which can be really great, but also the worst.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, okay, I had to compromise on like every single thing on this and I wish I could redo it, but I can't. And I just have to turn it in or just show it. And then it is what it is. And that's it, So it's like, what I'm learning is it just, the parameters of success change. And sometimes it's just you have to get through something, and sometimes you can be really, really proud and like really satisfied with something. Like you said, it's not a given.
Yeah.
It's not. So, but like just knowing that like maybe it's a stepping stone. Yeah.
My very first guest that I had on this podcast was my teacher from grad school. His name's Baljinder Sekon, and I'm not quite ready to ask you my final question, but his answer to my final question was that the music that he is most proud of having written, that he's most happy with, are the pieces of his that like get the least performed or shown to an audience. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting because I feel the same exact way.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be that tension of like, right, the process of making something versus the process of someone like exhibiting it, right? And like, I just think once art is made, it goes out into the world sometimes, right? And then you have no control.
Yeah.
Like the artist, you have to just let go of what people are gonna get from it, because it could be completely different than what you intended, but like you have to let go of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes artists really hold on to, no, that's not what I meant. Or like, you were supposed to laugh, not cry. And it's like, but you have no control over the audience.
Yeah.
And you have no idea what they're bringing to the table, what experience they're bringing, how they're going to be affected by it. You can only control what you put out there. You can't control the reaction. Yeah. So, but to be a viewer of your own work and have satisfaction, I mean, what an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting into my final set of questions, these are questions that I ask everybody. And I realize now that this first of these three questions might be interesting given some of the things that you've said about how you view yourself as an artist. But I'll ask it anyway. What do you think that you would be doing, artistically or otherwise, if it wasn't making film, making video?
I can tell you what I sort of thought my life would be like, and like I still have those tendencies.
Sure.
So for a minute, I thought I was going to be a social worker, and I really like helping people. And it's just like my nature, you know, I want to be a helper. And, but I think those tendencies came out in certain ways in my art practice, like, and especially with the nonprofit I ran, like I was caring for the work. Like I was caring for this entity that I had created, right? So it's like, so I like to kind of like use whatever privilege I have and like lift people up, or lift an art form up, or kind of like make something that's inaccessible accessible.
Yeah.
And so like I think that's like the most realistic answer is I'd probably be teaching like full time, which is most of my friends who've studied film and filmmaking and art. That's what they do. But it unrelated to that, like, you know, it's kind of like the social work thing, caring for folks, but also this idea of always loved spaces, and I love math and science and spreadsheets, right? Which is kind of like the opposite of some things we've been talking about. And so there's this part of my brain that likes to put things in order, and that kind of goes to the archivist thing, where it's like I like to kind of like this set data of something and kind of like put it in its place, but then you got to figure out what place it is, right? Yeah. So I like to organize. So in that ways, like I actually would love to be a film and video archivist. Like I think that would be very, very cool, and work in a library or something. But I also have always been drawn to architecture and spaces and creating spaces, which also to me, like we haven't mentioned it before, but I just will. Like we're sitting in a bookstore that I own. And like, to me, this is just curating. Like I've just created a space with certain things in mind, like to make people feel welcome, to make people feel warm, to make the books so you can find them and see them. You know, so I almost feel like what if you have this kind of creative kind of idea of curating your life, you can like curate anything. You know, fill in the blank. So. And that's what I kind of always liked about architecture and spaces and things. So.
For what it's worth, I'm also a fellow spreadsheet lover. So, even though it may not make sense to anyone. Is there a tool that you use in your practice that you think everyone should know about and that everyone else could benefit from? And this could be a tool for other artists, other filmmakers, or just like regular people.
Oh gosh, a tool.
Could be a process. Or, you know, it doesn't have to be like a physical object.
Yeah, I think it's a really general blanket statement, but I think just taking care of your mental health is really important. And I kind of mentioned that before. Like, if you can't be a present, healthy person in the world, you can't make things. You know? And so, I mean, Lady Gaga, of all people, recently was on a podcast, and she was talking about this idea of the tortured artist, and like when you're in pain and when you're like really down and out, and the idea is that that's when you make your best work. And she's like, no, it's all bullshit. Like, no. Like, that wasn't my best work. Like, I'm making my best work now, and I'm healthy and happy, and like, you know. And so it might, I've done lectures and talks and stuff to young students, and similar question: what's a tool? What's something that you can do that's going to further your art practice or your career? And it's just take care of yourself. Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yep.
So my final question is, what is something that you've never had a chance to say about your art that you've always wanted to share with people?
Oh, okay.
This is also usually the hardest question for people.
Yeah. I'm really grateful, I think, and very thankful to my family and also my friends and my mentors and the people I met in school who just like went with it, right? Yeah. Like, were supportive in ways that like any crazy idea or like thing that I wanted to do or work out or spend money on or like, they were just really supportive. And I can see now that I'm older how some people didn't get that.
Yeah.
And so when you're not in an environment or around people who are supportive, you can't dream, right? You can't experiment. You can't come up with wacky ideas and try to do them. You can't project on a train,
Right.
And so I think that like it might not come out in my art or on my website or like my CV, but how thankful I really am to community and to opportunities like this to be able to just ramble on and like talk to someone who's interested, because like I know what it's like to live in my head, but to kind of like get that out there and then also have like a willing ear and an audience who like isn't gonna just think I'm this crazy artist weirdo, right? To humor me and laugh at my jokes. I'm very thankful for that and really grateful. So.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I'm happy to be sitting here talking with you. It's been so great. I feel like we could probably talk for a lot longer, but
Yes.
we'll stop while we're ahead. Jacqueline, thanks so much again for your time with me today, and just especially congrats on your latest project, because it's really wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's been great. Thank you.
There is something I find absolutely incredibly powerful about Jacqueline's openness, not only in the content of her work, but in how she talks about her practice, this kind of balance between vulnerability and a willingness to explore difficult, often unfinished spaces. I know that this conversation happened at just the right time, quite serendipitously in my own life, and I really hope that it landed similarly for you. You can see more of Jacqueline's work by visiting her website, projectplane.com, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes for this episode. I'm Tyler Kline, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Music Maker. Music Maker with Tyler Kline is a production of Loose Leaf Transmissions, made for all ears. We are online at looseleaftransmissions.com, where you can find more episodes of the podcast and ways to support the show and the network. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you here next time for another edition of Music Maker.